Welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Oto Abasieko. In this edition, we'll be looking at Nigeria's economy, considering the fact that it's facing its own challenge in the fiscal area. And we meet to discuss this is Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist of PWC Nigeria. It's great to have you, sir.
Great to be here.
Yes. You've been talking about the economic outlook, which you've shared in your experience being in Nigeria. First, give us an insight to the post-election. Since we had the election of a new government and inauguration, how do you assess the fiscal level at the moment?
Well, I think everyone knows that the oil contributed over 70% of the revenue for the government at all levels in Nigeria back in 2014 and earlier. And of course, the oil price has collapsed, and so the oil price has reduced those contributions by about 60%. So, the net result is right now we face tremendous fiscal problems, and you've seen in the press, obviously there's some difficulties in the federal government, but where it's a real issue is at the state level, where the allocations from the oil revenue have been cut in more than half, and many states have not been able to pay their salaries or pay their contractors on that. So right now, Nigeria is in a real problem dealing with those fiscal challenges. Then the other issue, of course, is, some people were hoping that oil price would come back, except the last few weeks we've in fact seen that with the Iranian oil deal, continues to be tremendous pressure on prices, and they've sunk from about $65 back to $53 today for Brent oil. So we think those headwinds are going to continue, and both levels of government have to figure out how to deal with this fiscal crisis.
Now, looking at tackling this fiscal crisis, there was the need for the federal government to somewhat intervene by a kind of bailout, which has been debated as not a bailout but a statutory allocation, and also the issue of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, where the president, when he inaugurated the National Council of States, chaired by the Vice President, said that all revenue-generating agencies must start remitting full scale. Now, what is your take on this? Is this a way of now beginning to tackle this fiscal issue ahead?
Well, I think in our view, the federal government's starting to take the right steps. So there's a few things that have to happen. You're exactly right. It makes more sense and is the right model that revenue that goes to agencies, revenue-raising agencies, is first remitted to the federal government, and then that they remit back what's required for their expenses. So that makes sure that there's no leakage there. So that's one step. The other step is really around tax generation overall. As I said earlier, in 2014, over 70% of the revenue was from oil and gas. That's collapsed. There has to be a replacement. But the good news, in fact, is that up until now, Nigeria's raised very small amounts of revenue from tax, a little over 2% of GDP, which is much lower than every other jurisdiction in the world, and even in sub-Saharan Africa. So we think there's tremendous headroom for them to raise a lot more tax revenue just by making sure that people come into the tax system. So that includes both individuals and the pay-as-you-earn. It includes the VAT tax at 5%. It also includes bringing in many mid-sized corporates that maybe weren't fully compliant with the tax regulations. So we think you do that, then the federal government isn't going to be able to solve this issue. The other part of it is in the transition, very good thing for Nigeria is that it actually has very low debt to GDP, less than about 10%. So if you compare it, for example, to developed economies where typically it could be 150%, you could see that difference there. So we think that there's the ability for the federal government to manage through this, through the actions, 3 or 4 different actions on that. But they are going to help the states out, because the states, many of them have survived the last few years on high oil prices. They have had effectively no internally generated revenue. So they're starting from no base to set up an infrastructure to collect that. Their own economic development has not been very strong. So over this period, the next few years, the federal government will have to support states in coming through that. I think the one thing, though, is critical is I don't think anyone in this country should rely on oil price coming back. It may be $80 next year, it may be $100 in 2 years, who knows? But you cannot rely on that as an economic strategy. We think the country needs to sort of assume oil is going to be even as low as $40, and in the face of that, have a strategy for dealing with these fiscal issues.
Okay, you talked about the fact that Nigeria is on the meat of being an oil economy. Why do you say that, and what are the other sectors that you begin to see that will drive the economy?
Right. So, I mean, oil is 94% of export revenue last year, and as I said, 70% of government revenue, but it's only 11% of GDP. So there's a tremendous structural imbalance between the real economy and the role oil's played for the export dollars and also for the fiscal system. So what has to happen is all of those other sectors that contribute 89% need to be brought into the export sector and brought into the fiscal structure for that. But if you look around, I mean, obviously telecommunications is very large. Hospitality is growing very rapidly as people have more disposable income for entertainment and for travel within Nigeria. Nollywood's a big entertainment, a big contributor. Agriculture, there's tremendous interest around the world. We coined the term a few years ago, world food superpower. This country should be exporting a huge amount of food. Obviously, petrochemicals is very critical to replace importing refined products and generate local employment. There should be more attention paid to the power sector and making sure it gets itself into the right state. So many sectors, and of course ICT as well is a growing sector. Every company needs that. So I think that the future of the Nigerian economy is very balanced. I mean, I'm Canadian. People tend to think of us as an oil economy, but actually if you look at the Canadian economy, it has many sectors: tourism, manufacturing, automobiles, ICT. Nigerian economy should be a very broad-based economy. It's the largest country in Africa. It's got a tremendous number of very well-educated people. It's got every natural resource that's available. And if we look out 5 years, I think you'll see a very diversified economy.
You keep saying that the fiscal issue is a challenge. We even have an inflation of 9.2% on a high. What do you project in terms of this government? Will they be able to navigate through this? A lot of expectations from Nigerians, the change they voted for.
Right. So I think what's interesting about inflation is, in a way, this country, if it was going the right direction, you'd actually see deflation. I mean, why are things expensive here? They're expensive because infrastructure makes it difficult. There's a lot of time used to get around the roads. It's expensive because of security issues, so people have to buy their own security, and it's expensive because power is expensive. I mean, electricity is not available, so people replace it with high-cost diesel-generated power. So in fact, if those issues are addressed, I think you could see within 2 years the prices actually start to decline, because it should be lower cost. Everyone who visits Lagos knows it's a very high cost environment. You go out and you buy a beer, you go out and you buy some foodstuffs, you eat out in the restaurants here. I mean, I think if this administration can get those three issues addressed, you may actually see not a decline in inflation, you should actually see deflation for some of the core food stuff. Agriculture should increase domestically, you don't need to import it. And if the security costs go down, power costs go down, then the cost of final consumer goods will go down. And if that goes in the right direction, that's when you'll start to see the Naira appreciate, if we can do that. But as long as every company has to provide its own security, as long as it has to pay diesel prices for electricity, and as long as you have these infrastructure bottlenecks, it'll be very difficult to get inflation down.
Yeah. And then just a quick one. You said Nigeria should rethink its 36-state model. Is it in the fact that it's too costly to run that model, or what is your?
Well, I think that the important thing about the post-oil economy here is there's going to have to be a lot of different economic strategies in different parts of the country to achieve success, and it's not clear that at a small state level they can generate an independent economic strategy. The natural grouping is a little bit bigger, it's more regional, but in addition we all know the high cost of governance with 36 states. So now that the oil revenue has declined so precipitously, is it time to actually think the unthinkable, which is, instead of having 36 states, there should be perhaps the 6 regional groupings or some sort of intermediate on that. But I think that's a debate that Nigerians will start to have over the next few years as they confront the fact that there's no longer the oil revenue there used to be.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Andrew Nevin, for the time. And that will be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. Join us for updates and analysis on our social media platform, Twitter and Facebook. Till next edition, thank you for watching and have a lovely day.